They really didn't understand it. But of course they really had no means to. How could they? How could they possibly know that it was contagious only after long periods of exposure and close contact? The only thing they knew about it was what it looked like and what it did to a person in the advanced stages. That they knew too well. They understood how it maimed and disfigured. And that was enough for fear to take over. Yes, I'm talking about the disease of leprosy. In a world and in a time in which the disease has all but been eradicated, except in small pockets, we in the modern age cannot appreciate the fear that accompanied this word in the ancient world of Jesus. It brought about the same responses as the word plague did in the 1200s, or smallpox in the 1700s, or AIDS in the 1990s. It frightened people. They felt largely helpless against it, as indeed they were. What happens when fear takes over is that people don't act, they react. And reactions to leprosy were both swift and cruel. In times not far removed from our own, people would be put to death by their own family. It seems incredible to us today, but on the edge of every large city in the ancient world, huge pits were dug, and in those pits lived the lepers of the community. And if, by some remote possibility, they did escape this hovel and venture out into the streets, they would be quickly greeted with shouts of leper, accompanied by stones to make them keep their distance. In Jesus' day, a leper by law could not get within 45 meters or so of a clean person. And this was the heart of the matter. Not only did these wretched people have to endure the trials of an incurable affliction, they were also isolated from society, and they were kept from the community of faith. The horror of disease, a lifestyle of loneliness, isolation, and hopelessness. Where could they find hope? The only friend a leper had was God himself, for in this life they were doomed. It was a walking death. This then is the background of the leper that we meet today. And I read from Mark chapter 1, verses 40 through to 45. A man with leprosy came to Jesus and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So what is it that we can learn from this man's tragic story? Firstly, we learn of the loneliness of leprosy. His personal life remains a mystery to us. His name, we don't know. His years of suffering and pain aren't mentioned. What we do know, however, is that this leper comes to Jesus alone. There is no one else mentioned in this text, just Christ and the leper. Mark's Gospel simply shares with us a brief happening in the life of Jesus of Nazareth. Perhaps the shortness of this gospel story obscures its deeper meaning. At first glance, we might think that Mark is telling us that God has the power to heal, and certainly that is true. But it seems to me there is something more to the story. Something connected with the leper's life before he was healed. Something which for years the leper couldn't see, and something which perhaps he never dreamed of even in his wildest imagination. That is, in all his loneliness and despair, while his flesh was rotting away long before his healing took place, God had not forgotten him. Indeed, he was at work in his life, leading him toward that moment of destiny that was to be uniquely his. And it seems incredible that we can say that, because as we look back over the leper's life this morning, it's hard for our minds to fathom how God could be at work in that situation. We, of course, can accept the final victory. We can accept the fact that God has the power to heal. But here's the rub. Can we accept the fact, in many more ways more important, that quietly and mysteriously God was there all along? That God was leading, he was sustaining, he was guiding this poor wretch to an appointment with history. God with him and by him, even when this poor man thought that his life was over. Perhaps he had even given up praying. It seems to me that if Mark is telling us anything, it is that God is not just with us in the final moment, in the final victory of life. God is with us all the way through. He is working, he is there beside us, and he is there by his side even when God may have been the furthest thought from his mind. And I must be honest, I suspect that we are all very much like this leper. When we're in the midst of a crisis, when we're hurting, and when it's really hard for us to see that God is working in our life, we can't see him. Perhaps there are times in our lives when we genuinely feel that we shall never smile again. Perhaps there are times in our lives when we think that our present situation will be our life's lot until the end. And perhaps there are times when we travel through life alone. It happens to all of us at some time or other. But just like the leper in this story, while he was at his lowest possible point, I assure you, God is at work in our lives too. Jesus was once with Nicodemus on top of the Mount of Olives, and he told him, "Do you hear the wind blowing? You don't know where it comes from, and you don't know where it's going." Nicodemus, the Spirit of God is like that. Sometimes it's a gentle breeze, and other times it's a mighty hurricane. But it's always there. The first thing that we can learn from this man's story is not only the loneliness of the leper, but that God is always present. The second thing that we can learn from this man's tragic story is that our suffering moves God's hand. Recently, I listened to a message in which the preacher said that God suffers with us when we suffer. I'm not so sure about that. But what I am sure about is that our suffering does move God's hand. You see, Christ suffered on the cross many years ago. He doesn't need to suffer again. Our suffering moves God's heart. We read the words, filled with compassion. Those are the words that Mark uses. And so we need to be assured God does not sit idly by when we are in pain. And Jesus reached out and touched the man, saying, "I am willing, be clean." You may have heard this story before, but it bears repeating. It's the story of a New York City policeman investigating a case, and one day dialing the phone, he somehow knew before he had even finished dialing that he'd made a mistake. The phone rang once, twice, and then someone said, "You've got the wrong number." And then the line went dead. Mystified for a moment, the policeman hit redial. "I said, you've got the wrong number," the voice came over the phone. And once more, the phone clicked dead. "How could he possibly know I've got the wrong number?" the policeman asked himself. Now, a policeman is trained to be curious and concerned, and so he dialed a third time. "Hey, come on," the voice said. "Is this you again?" "Yeah, it's me." "I was wondering how you knew I had the wrong number before I even said anything." "You figure it out yourself." And he felt the line go dead again. The man sat there for a while, and the receiver hanging loosely in his fingers. And he called the man back. "Did you figure it out yet?" the man asked. "The only thing that I can think of is that nobody ever calls you." "You got it." And the phone went dead for the fourth time. And then, chuckling, the officer dialed the man back. "What do you want now?" asked the man. "Oh, I thought I'd just call to say hello." "Hello? Why?" "Well, if nobody ever calls you, I thought that maybe I should." There may be nobody else in this world that is moved with compassion enough to reach out to you at the moment. It happens. Many people fall between the cracks of life and get left behind. Yes, in church, in business, everywhere. There are lepers all around us who live isolated lives. And sometimes the only one we must rely on is God himself. God who dials our number and says, "I just wanted to call you and say hello." God who brings joy to the sorrowful, peace to the troubled, and healing to the lepers. God who embraces the lonely in the shadow of his wings, who fills the empty, and who guides those who are without hope. Yes, we can learn of the loneliness of leprosy and know that God is always present. The second thing we can learn from this man's tragic story is that our suffering moves God's hand. Another thing we can learn from this man's story is that our Lord is willing to heal. Even in the depths of physical misery and death, there is spiritual healing. Our tragedies can be God's triumphs. The leper came asking to be healed. "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Which really isn't a question, is it? It's rather a statement of faith. If you're willing, he said. He didn't say, if you're able. It's a recognition that Jesus does have the ability, the power of God to heal, and that changed his life. I share with you another story, and it's about Michael Wayne Hunter, who was put on death row in California in 1983 and was in San Quentin prison. After his third year on death row, something happened. One day, he was getting ready to spend some time exercising in the yard when the guard said, "You're going to miss Mother Teresa. She's coming today to see you guys." "Yeah, sure," he said. "One more of those designs they have on us." A little later, he heard more commotion about it and thought it might be true that Mother Teresa was coming to see them. Another guard said, "Don't go back into your cells for lockup. Mother Teresa has stayed to see you guys." And so Michael jogged up to the front in gym shorts and a tattered basketball shirt with the arms ripped out. And on the other side of the security screen was this tiny woman who looked about 100 years old. Yes, it was Mother Teresa. This hardened prisoner wrote about his experience. He said, "You have to understand that basically I'm a dead man. I don't have to observe any sort of social convention. And as a result, I can break all the rules and say whatever I want when I want. But one look at this Nobel Prize winner that I was speechless. Michael said an incredible vitality and warmth came from her wizened, piercing eyes. She smiled at him. She blessed a religious medal and put it in his hands. This murderer, who wouldn't have walked voluntarily down the hall to see the warden, the governor, the president, or the pope, stood before this woman, and all he could say was, "Thank you, Mother Teresa." Now listen to what happens. At one point, Mother Teresa turned and pointed her hand at the sergeant guard. "What you do to these men," she told him, "you do to God." The sergeant almost faded away in surprise and wonder. He couldn't believe Mother Teresa had just said that to him. That day was the turning point in the life of Michael Wayne Hunter. This San Quentin death row prisoner was cleansed by that experience. Life changed. Suddenly, there was meaning to it. So drastic was the change, a new trial was set, and the death penalty was not sought. The verdict was guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, but a new sentence was given: life. Life without the possibility of parole. Prosecution did not seek the death penalty because Mr. Hunter was now a model prisoner and an award-winning writer. He was one other thing: a testimony that Christ is still willing to heal, still willing to touch the untouchable, and still willing to make us whole. My friend, at our local community church, we sing a beautiful song in worship entitled Waymaker. Its refrain has these words: Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. The leper precisely needed this. The blind man needed this. The lame man needed this. The woman at the well needed this. The woman caught in adultery needed this. All the people that encountered Jesus in the gospel stories needed a waymaker. They needed a miracle worker. Indeed, they needed someone to be a light in their situation of darkness. The same goes for you and me. And so I ask you, won't you let Jesus be the waymaker for the situation you're facing right now? Let Jesus be the miracle worker for you. Allow Jesus to shine the light of his love and grace into the darkness of your life. Hear me today. What I say to you is this: God really cares. And I ask you, will you let him work in your life and circumstances? Let him work things his way. Trust him to be the waymaker in your life and the circumstances you're in. All you need to do is ask him. Let God do the work and watch what happens. God bless you. Amen.